All right, so the next section in the probability unit is odds. So what in the world are odds, right? So I'm pretty sure you've heard about odds before, maybe when you're gambling. Again, I'm not telling you to do it, please don't, right? But if you do, right, you've heard about the words odds, like what are the odds of this happening and such. So pretty much what odds are, there are ratios where you compare two numbers, right? So you compare the number of ways that an event can happen to the number of ways that the event cannot happen. So when you want to see if you have a chance of winning something, you're like, what are the odds, right? So again, that's what we're going to be doing. So again, don't think it's something terrible. It's pretty simple. You're just going to be comparing two numbers. So the important thing though is that you read the problem carefully. When I ask you for what are the odds in favor of something happening, you're actually going to start by giving me the number of favorable outcomes. And then you're going to compare it to the number of unfavorable outcomes. So I ask you, what are the odds in favor of me winning this game? You would start with me winning and then compare it to me not winning, right? Because I'm asking you for the odds in favor, so you start with the favorable number for me and then you compare it to the unfavorable number. So this is one way we could phrase a problem. Now, somebody else might use it differently. If we ask you for odds against, you will give me the same quantities, but you will write them backwards, right? So when I ask you what are the odds against something happening, you start with the unfavorable outcomes, and then you compare it to the number of favorable outcomes, right? So what are the odds against me winning? You would start with the number of me not winning, and then you would compare it to the number of me winning. So again, they're pretty much the same thing, but it just depends how we phrase it. And that tells you the way you're going to write it down. Again, if this makes no sense, don't worry. We have a few problems to see if we can understand the difference. So we're going to work on example number 1. If you notice, it's very similar to the rest of the examples. I'm just changing the words around to see if we understand. So pretend we have a bag that contains 5 blue marbles and 7 red marbles, right? So we have 5 blue and 7 red. Now, the question I'm asking you is, what are the odds in favor? So this one has a lot to do with the way you're gonna write your answer. So what are the odds in favor of choosing a blue marble? So just for review, when I ask you for odds in favor, you start with the favorable outcomes and then you compare it to the unfavorable outcomes. So of choosing a blue marble, so that means the first number you're going to give me is blue marbles, and then you're going to compare it to the number that are not blue. Okay, so when I ask you for in favor, you start with that number first, and then you give me the opposite of that. So how many blue marbles are in this bag? We have a total of 5, and then how many are not blue? Well, 7, because 7 of them are red. So that's it. It's super simple. That's going to be my answer for this one. When we're talking about odds, we use that little colon in the middle. The way you read this is with the word 2. So you say 5 to 7. So I'm just going to put the little word here. Like that. Okay, so that's the way to properly read it, 5 to 7. Okay, so hopefully that made sense. Let's try another one. Same question. We still have 5 blue marbles, 7 red marbles, but now the question is asking you for what are the odds against choosing a blue marble. So again, since I'm asking for odds against, you're going to start with unfavorable, compare it to favorable. What in the world does that mean? That means that we're going to start with the number of marbles that are not blue because it has the word against. So we're going to start with the number of marbles that are not blue, and then we're going to compare it to the number of marbles that are blue. So pretty simple. What do you think the answer for this one is? Just like the other one, but backwards, right? So this one's going to be 7 to 5. Okay, so pretty simple. And again, I'm going to go over it over and over and over again just to make sure it's okay. So same questions, just I changed the color here. What are the odds in favor of choosing a red marble? In favor means we're going to start with the ones that are red. So we're going to start with the number of red marbles compared to the number that are not red. So in this one, what would be our first number? It would have to be the 7 because we have 7 red marbles. And then we have 5 that are not red. So my answer for this one, 7 to 5. Again, I know you're thinking it's the same thing. Of course it is. I just want to make sure we got it. All right, one last one here. Same scenario. What are the odds against choosing a red marble? So against red. So that means we start with a number that are not red, and then we compare it to the number that are red, right? So not red because it has a word against, not red, and then red. So that means how many are not red? There's 5, and how many are red is 7. So my answer would be 5, 2, 7. Pretty simple. All right, one extra little thing that we haven't talked about. When you have odds, just like a fraction, they have to be simplified. If 5 to 7 could be simplified, we would have to do it. But there is no number that can divide the 5 and the 7, so that's why all of our answers have stayed as is. But don't worry, we're going to have a few problems later on where you could simplify, so we will be simplifying. So you'll see what I mean. All right, let's go ahead and try another problem. If you notice on this one, this is meant to be a review of probability, which was the first section in our unit. So if you have questions about that, go back to the previous video. But it's just meant as a review. So here we have a spinner that can be used for a game. The question is, what is the probability of the spinner landing on purple? Again, nowhere in there do we see the word odds. So there's going to be no ratios here. But you should know that when we're talking about probability, there should be a fraction. So what is the probability of the spinner landing on purple? Count how many sections we have on our spinner. We have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we know that my denominator is going to be 5. Now, out of those 5, how many are purple? Well, we have 1, 2. Right, so my answer is simply 2 over 5. Again, this is a probability question. So remember, probabilities end up being fractions. So 2 over 5. Next one. What is the probability of the spinner not landing on purple? Okay, so again, you should know how to do this one. My denominator is still 5 because we have 5 sections. And out of those, how many are not purple? Well, we have 1, 2, 3 that are not purple. So my answer for this one, 3 over 5. Okay, so those two questions were sneaked in there just to review probability. But now we're going to tackle the same problem, but with odds. Right, so I can leave the same spinner there, and I'm going to ask you a question about odds. So the question here is, what are the odds in favor of the spinner landing on purple? So again, the word probability doesn't appear here, so my answer is not going to be in fraction form. Since they're asking for odds, it's going to be a ratio. Now, the odds in favor of landing on purple. So hopefully you remember by now. In favor means we're going to start with that number first. So how many are purple here? We have 1, 2. So we're going to have 2. They're odds, so I'm supposed to have a little colon. And then remember, after that, you give me the number that are not purple because it's in favor. So we start with the purple and then we do the not purple. So how many are not purple? We have 1, 2, 3. So that means that my answer should be 2, 2, 3. All right, so again, odds in favor. You start with favorable, then you give me the unfavorable. In this specific example, it means we start with the purple and then the ones that are not purple. So my answer is 2 to 3. Again, you know this is your final answer because 2 and 3 cannot be divided by any number. So you leave it like that, 2 to 3. Okay, just to make sure it made a lot of sense, let's try this one. What are the odds against the spinner landing on blue? So since it has the word against, we're going to start with the number of unfavorable, meaning that the number that are not blue. Right, so remember against kind of means not, so we're going to start with the numbers that are not blue, and then we're going to do the number that are actually blue. So in this problem, how many are not blue? Well, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 that are not blue. So that's going to be my first number. And how many are blue? Well, we have 1. So that means my answer is simply 4, 2, 1. Okay, I'm really hoping this is all making sense. So again, we know probability and we know odds, right? So they're kind of different, but kind of the same. All right, moving on to the next one. Again, like I said before, cards just give themselves to be problems in math. So we're going to try this one here. So pretend you have a deck of cards, right? And you draw a single card. What are the odds in favor? So let me go ahead and just underline that real quick. Odds in favor of drawing a card with a number less than 4. All right, before you start panicking, let's just break this problem apart. When I ask you for odds in favor, again, that means we're going to start with favorable outcomes, right? You start with the ones in favor, and then the ones that are unfavorable. Now, in this specific problem, favorable means the number of cards that are actually less than 4, right? Because that's what they're asking us for. So the number of cards less than 4. And then unfavorable, well, it would be the opposite, the number of cards that are not less than 4. So again, I have the picture there to help us out. How many of those cards are numbers that are less than 4? So hopefully we all agree on the same number. If I am not mistaken, all of these cards here are numbers that are less than 4. Because again, it has to be a number. I know technically the ace might be less than 4, but it's a letter. They're asking us for a card that has a number less than 4. So how many are those? We only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So how many cards have a number less than 4? It would be 8. And how many cards do not have a number less than 4? I'm not going to make you count all of them. But remember, there's a total of 52. So if there's a total of 52 and 8 of them are less than 4, that means that there is a total of 44 left that are not less than 4. So my answer is simply 8 to 44, right? So again, the odds in favor means you start with a number of cards that meet the requirement, less than 4, there was 8, and then the cards that do not meet the requirement, which was a total of 44 that were left. You don't believe me? You could take your time, pause the video, count them, there's a total of 44 left. Now, like I mentioned before, ratios have to be simplified. Here we notice that both the 8 and the 44 can be divided by 4, so you're expected to do so. So 8 to 44 simplifies to 2 to 11. So again, just like you do with fractions, you are going to have to simplify your ratios. So 2 to 11 would be my answer for this problem here. All right, so by now, you guys should be experts on odds. If you're not, go back to the beginning of the video, watch it again. By then, you should hopefully be. So now we're going to move on to something a tiny little bit different. So once you know odds, and I give you the odds just like we've been having on the previous problems, we can actually link it back to probability. So we're going to go over an example real quick. Pretend I go into a certain group and I count the number of men, and I count the number of women. And I come back to you and I tell you, okay, the ratio of men to women is 3 to 5. So that means that there is 3 men and there is 5 women, right? That's what a ratio means. Then since I gave you that information, you should be able to say, oh, okay, it clicks. There's a total of 8 people in the group, right? Because that's the ratio. So there's 3 men, 5 women. That means that there's a total of 8. Again, this could be a simplified ratio. There could be more, but that would be the simple scenario. So 3 to 5 means a total of 8. With that information, you could actually start answering probability questions. So with that information, you could actually start coming up with fractions. So if the ratio is 3 to 5, and I ask you what's the probability of choosing a man, then you know it's going to be 3 over 8. Because there's 3 men, and you were able to figure out that there's 8 people total. If I ask you what's the probability of choosing a woman, then you should be able to figure it out also. It's going to be 5 over the 8. So you see how if I give you a ratio, you can come up with a probability yourself. Again, we're going to have a few more examples just to go over that, just so we could all start linking together. All right, so in this problem, I give you the odds and I'm asking you for a probability. So if the odds in favor of an event happening are 13 to 17, what is the probability of the event happening? And of course, they want your answer as a simplified fraction. So just like I did with the other example, when you have men and women and you want to find the total amount of people in the group, you just add them. Same thing here. If the event in favor that is going to happen is 13 to 17. First thing you want to figure out is the total. So the total, 13 plus 17, hopefully you can help me out here. I'll write it down up here. The total is going to be, okay, there you go, 30. So when I give you odds, the first thing you want to do is just figure out the totals, and you just add the two quantities together. Now, what is the probability of the event happening? So when we're talking about odds in favor, because this gives it away right here, odds in favor, that means that the first number is favorable and the second number is unfavorable. So in this scenario, the first number represents that the event is happening, and the second number represents the event is not happening. So in our example, the 13 represents that the event is going to happen, and 17 that the event is not going to happen. So we are so ready to answer the question. What is the probability of the event happening? Well, I simply grab the 13, and remember it's probability, so it's a fraction, 13 over the total, which we already know to be 30. So my answer would simply be 13 over 30. Again, your final answer would be simplified, but in this case, it should already be simplified. So that would be it. So just to walk over it one more time, I give you the odds. First thing you want to figure out is your total, because when I ask you for probability, your total is always your denominator. And then you simply pick the correct number depending on the question, and that's going to be your numerator. In this question, they were asking you, what is the probability of the event happening? And since this was in favor, happening was the first number. So it was simply 13 over 30. Okay, if you're a little bit lost, hang in there. We have 2 more problems to go. Hopefully we'll start clicking there. All right, kind of the same thing. But the difference is this one has odds against. So if the odds against, and I'm going to stop here, against means that we start with unfavorable outcomes first and then favorable. So if the odds against an event happening, that means that the ratio I'm about to give you, the first number represents not happening because of the word against. So the first number represents not happening, the second number represents happening. So before we move on, we have to know what the 12 and the 8 represent. 12 is the odds of the event not happening, and the 8 are the odds of the event happening. Now, the question is, what is the probability? So as soon as you see the word probability, you know we're going to have a fraction and we have to have a total. So my total is going to be 12 plus 8, which gives me 20. So my probability is going to have a 20 as a denominator. Now, what is the probability of the event happening? What's going to be the numerator then? Okay, if you said 8, then you are correct. So what is the probability of the event happening? Hopefully we all agree with the 20, right? The 20 is always your total. That goes there. Now, what's the probability of the event happening? Since this had the word against, that means that favorable was supposed to be the second number. Favorable means that it's going to happen. In this case, the second number was 8. So that's the one we used to answer the question. So 8 over 20, again, make sure you simplify. Both of these numbers were divided by 4, which gives us a simplified answer of 2 over 5. Okay, so that's all we had to do for this one. All right, one last problem to wrap everything up. Here we have an actual scenario of a game, right? If the odds against Becky winning a game are 2 to 17, so let me just go ahead and underline that. What is the probability that Becky will win the game? And make sure you give the answer as a simplified fraction since it's probability. So, odds against. As soon as you see that, stop and think, okay, what does the odds against mean? Odds against Becky winning means, because the word against is there, the first number represents Becky not winning. The second number represents Becky winning. Again, because the word against says that. If this would have said odds in favor, then we would have started, the first number would be winning, the second number would be not winning. So just make sure this is the first thing you do when you read a problem. So the odds against Becky winning are 2 to 17. So that means that the 2 represents Becky not winning, and the 17 represents Becky winning. right? So make sure you label those two numbers as what they are. Okay, now that we know what the two numbers represent, we could tackle the question, what is the probability that Becky will win? So first thing you have to do, remember probability, you have to come up with a total. So what is the probability that she will win? The total is 19, so that's my denominator. Which one of those two numbers represents Becky winning? The 17. So there you go. My final answer is just 17 over 19. Okay, so when you have odds, make sure you add them together. That gives you your denominator. And then you choose the correct number depending on what the question is asking. If the question would have been, what is the probability that Becky will not win? We would have used the 2 instead of the 17. So make sure you read the question carefully. And that's it for odds.